Hi, I'm Dolen Perkins-Valdez, and I'm a historical fiction writer. When I'm not writing, I'm teaching. When I'm not teaching, I'm playing with my kids. But the place I love to be the most is in the library. I love to read historical fiction. It just transports me. So I decided to start this book club. Here together, we will read stories featuring women's histories. We'll talk to writers, we'll have discussions. It'll be fun. Come on and join us. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Dolen.
How are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome to the book club.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.
So a lot of people don't know, but Robin and I started out on this journey the same year. Her first book, My Name is Mary Sutter, was published in 2010, right, Robin?
Absolutely. Just about, I think, a month after yours.
Yes, and I think that's how we connected because my book came out in 2010 as well, my first book.
Yeah.
And we were both historical fiction writers starting out our journey together. Neither one of us knew what we were doing, but we did it, and we are here 14 years later.
I'm so glad. I'm really so glad.
So, okay, I think let me pull up my notes here. Your first book, My Name is Mary Sutter, I just want to introduce y'all to Robin, was about a Civil War. She was eventually a surgeon, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And then your second book was about the painter Mary Cassatt. Mm-hmm. And then the third one took on Mary Sutter again.
Mm-hmm.
And now here we are, a wild and heavenly place. I think this is your first romance, right? Historical romance.
It is. And I really did. I wanted to write one of those 19th century epic continent spanning love stories. That was definitely my goal. That's what I wanted to do. I used to love to read those. So I thought I'm gonna try.
Well, another thing people don't know, this is one of the reasons why I love the book so much, Robin. I used to live in Seattle. I lived there for, oh gosh, I don't know, 6 years, I think. And I was intrigued by it. I had never spent any time in Seattle before I moved out there. And it's such an intriguing city. First of all, it's such a beautiful city. If anybody on this call has never been to Seattle, America's best kept secret, really. And I know a lot of y'all think it rains there all the time, but it doesn't rain all the time. It's a beautiful city. It's got vistas like you wouldn't believe. It's got so much natural beauty. And so one of the reasons I love this book so much is that you give us some of the history, the early history of Washington Territory. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this book and how you did this research?
Sure. Well, I had this idea of the kind of book I wanted to write, but of course, the question, that just opens up all kinds of doors for characters and for setting and everything else. And I am a big proponent of place. I always like to write about the places that I know, or if I don't know it well, go to the place. I live on a mountain right outside of Seattle called Cougar Mountain, where there are coal mines that run through. So that, if you live here, you sort of learn the history that in early 19th century Seattle, coal was one of the driving economic factors. The other piece I needed was for these characters to come from somewhere because it was going to be a continent-spanning love story. And my maiden name is Fraser, and I wanted them to come from Scotland. And then the third piece was I love the San Juan Islands, which are in the Salish Sea, north of Puget Sound. Gorgeous place to come visit. And I stumbled on these ruins on San Juan Island of this beautiful stone house that was unlike any other architecture anywhere else on any of the islands. I know the islands well. I have biked them for many years. And I found this ruin, and it looked as if someone had made it with love. Part of it's still standing. It's very crude, but you can see that somebody wanted to make a beautiful place. And when I went to Scotland to do research, I discovered that the architecture that I discovered on San Juan Islands very close to the early architecture of stone houses in Scotland. So I had an awful lot of pieces. I had things I could connect: Scotland, Seattle, the architecture, but also the industries. So coal in Seattle was very big. It was also big in England and Scotland. And shipbuilding was very big in Scotland because of the River Clyde. And for more than 100 years, the best ships in the world were built on the River Clyde. And there were three big shipbuilding efforts in the time that I wanted to place the novel in Seattle, on the beaches of the shoreline. So from there, I could start to fashion my research. And if you want, we can talk a little bit more in depth about that.
Well, I mean, I never would have associated coal with Seattle. Like some of the other things you talk about didn't feel like a surprise to me, like shipbuilding and the opium trade and some of the other things that came up. But coal is not something I would just think about. Yeah. So did you go into the archives? I mean, we're always curious in this book club, y'all, because I think of this book club as like writers talking about writing. So did you go to UW, as we say, the locals say, University of Washington archives or somewhere else, or like what was the research like?
Well, I'm very lucky because I live on this particular mountain where the coal mines were. And I wrote this during the pandemic, so nothing was open. But there is an historical society here called the Newcastle Historical Society, because Newcastle was the coal town on this mountain named after Newcastle in England. And these guys are Microsoft former engineers, software engineers. These guys have taken a look at this mountain in such peculiar and wonderful detail that they were an incredible source of knowledge for me. They've written a wonderful book called 100 Years of Coal, I think, in Newcastle. But also, one gentleman in particular hiked all over the mountain with me. And we found all the old coal openings and all the old detritus from the coal mines. He showed me everything, where the train came in. I mean, the endless amounts of research that the hours that he saved me, they all saved me by doing the meticulous primary research. I probably 1,000 hours they saved me of doing all the work.
It's interesting. I mean, this is your fourth book. I'm in the process of writing my fourth book. As historical fiction writers, we learn how to make use of people resources. Like that first book, we're doing all the research and we're like killing ourselves. But by the time it's true, right? Like by the time you get 4 or 5, you learn that maybe if you just made a phone call.
And you know what's so great about doing that is that people are really nice. One, they love to talk about what they know. And two, they have no problem spending hours and hours with you to help you get it right. It's extraordinary to me how generous people have been to me.
And don't people get excited when they know it's a novel and you're not like an academic? Like I always feel like
Yes.
people get kind of excited when they hear it's a novel.
Excuse me. They do. I think sometimes, you're sort of met with a little, I have a cough from COVID from 14 months ago. Excuse me. I'm going to take some water.
Some water. And I'm just going to remind y'all while she's getting a little water to start putting your questions in the chat or any comments. Somebody here on Instagram says, I live in Olympia, so I'm interested in reading your book. We've got lots of people tuning in today from Instagram. Then we have our regulars from Facebook, and we are also now broadcasting live on YouTube. So Robin, in the book, we've got Haley and we've got Samuel. I have not read a good romance novel in a while. And what I loved about this book is that I was kind of in love with Samuel. Like I remember that this is what I love about romance novels, that you kind of fall in love with the characters. Like you want to be with Samuel. He's such a great guy.
He is a great guy. And I wanted him to be a great guy. I wanted him to be, he's the kind of guy who will go to the ends of the earth for you. And I think that that's an extremely attractive trait. But I stole a friend's son, so he resembles a friend's son in the physicality. His name is also Samuel. Ooh. And I just took the good bits from all the lovely men I've known over the years who have been good to me. In my past, I have had one person who's gone to the ends of the earth for me. And so when you can pull all those traits together and make one wonderful human, that was a really fun and necessary thing to do. He had to sort of live up to what his character was going to have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And his foil is James, who, was so problematic. But it was like very difficult to see how Haley was going to get herself out of this situation. I thought she did a really good job of like closing all the doors for her.
Yeah. I was just talking about that with somebody today, because I discovered by my third novel that I write 19th century women breaking 19th century glass ceilings.
Mm.
And in this particular novel, Haley couldn't break the ceiling because of her circumstances. So it's the first time I didn't have a heroine just barreling her way through and breaking all the rules, because this time she was really stuck. And it was a little hard for me to write. I think, I can't impose my 21st century ideals on her, and I didn't allow myself to, but it was really hard to watch her get into this pickle and wonder how she was going to save herself when she had so many other obligations that kept her from being able to just, I don't know, pick up her roots and go elsewhere.
Mhm. Isn't that the hardest needle to thread as a historical fiction writer? Like wanting to write a person of that time while also keeping the contemporary reader from slamming the book shut and throwing it on the floor. Like
Yeah.
people, the way people made choices was different. I mean, there were certain things, of course, that were quite modern, but um, like when Haley's mother leaves, it feels really awful in the book, but it also felt very realistic to me.
Yeah, I have some sympathy for her.
Me
Uh,
too. Me too.
for Haley's mom. She comes a little bit out of my mother. My mother was born on the Upper East Side in New York City and lived a very aristocratic life. And she ended up in Albany, New York, living a less than an aristocratic life. And I watched her, and when I was thinking about Haley's mom, her name is Davinia, I thought, what would someone like my mom do in this situation? And you can just see her break down. And I think every woman who reads that book could understand that,
Yeah.
that I can't take this anymore
And he
situation.
lies. He lies to her.
He he lies because he's not well, right? He
Mhm.
lies, her husband lies to her because he's not well, and he's sort of already going down the, I often frequently say, this novel is a little Romeo and Juliet, a little bit Heart of Darkness, but happier. So there's this sense of just, you're going down into the abyss, and if somebody's not well and you're interacting with them and hoping that they're going to be the person they were before, you're really in big trouble.
Although, like, in that time, they didn't think of mental health, right, in the same way.
No, right.
So they might have been even in denial, right, that he wasn't well.
Well, I think everybody was, absolutely, and his wife certainly didn't wanna face that, and she also didn't have the wherewithal to be able um, to pick apart the weeds on that one and to see, because then she would have to take over, and she didn't have the wherewithal to do that.
Mhm. Now you tackle some issues of race in early Seattle, which I was so intrigued by. A little bit of like how Chinese workers were there, primarily Chinese men were there, and how they were part of that fabric while also being, discriminated against. You talk about how tiny the Black population is there, and it's still tiny, Robin, but it's really tiny. But
Mhm.
and I apologize, y'all, if there's I'm trying not to give the big plot spoiler, but John Salvation is actually able to make a life partially because they go to, the remote part. They end up on the San Juan Islands.
They end up on San Juan Island, yeah. Yeah. It was really important for me to write race into this, and I have to tell you, a little earlier, Dolen and I were talking about editors and editors making choices and having discussions with your editors about what you're writing. And in this novel, there are two Black men who are pretty significant characters. They were far more significant in the draft that I turned into my editor. They had much larger subplots and a much more sort of their actions impacted the plot a little bit more.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
because of the word constraints, they made me take out some of the subplots.
Oh,
So
wow.
I had to condense John
Mhm.
Salvation's story, and I had to condense Press Loving's story. And somebody asked me the other day, which character did you love the most? And I say I love Press. I just absolutely love Press. And it killed me to take away some of his story.
How did you come up with those names? Those are great names, by the way.
Mhm. Well, the book actually started with these two men. Press Loving and John Salvation came from West Virginia,
Mhm.
and they were coal miners there, and kind of operates on this whole other history about Black miners coming to Seattle to break up strikes. But
Mm.
Press Loving was one of those uh, men. He's an actual man who came from the Southeast into Washington to break up a coal strike in Roslyn, Washington.
So that was a real person's name.
As a real person's name. I saw his name on some historical document and I thought, I need that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was writing Press's story, and then I thought it'd be really interesting if I had a son, and his original first name was John Salvation Freedom. And that was because Press is a former slave, but John Salvation was born free.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that dynamic, and that dynamic worked in the novel a lot more than it was allowed to in the final draft. So sometimes writers don't always get a complete and final choice about what goes into the novel, and that was in this particular situation.
Yeah, and it's hard to make those choices because you grow so close to them.
So close. I mean, my husband laughs that I wrote 3 novels in this book, but and then I could parse them out. And then the question becomes, am I the right person to write John Salvation and Press Loving's story? I love them. I love them. And I do want to see what continues to happen to them. So we'll see. We'll see.
Well, why don't we ask a couple of the questions that we have here? They're coming in on the chat, and if y'all have any questions, go ahead and ask them. Someone says, I was surprised about the coal as well, but I was also surprised about the prevalence of opium. The opium was just because that was the port, right? And so the ships would come in and they would try to avoid paying the tax. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, there was they called them factories. They took the raw opium from China and they worked it in Canada. It was legal in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
It was legal in the United States too. You just had to pay the tax. So a tin of opium, kind of like this, once it was refined, cost about $6, but that included the $2 tax that whoever was importing it or trying to sell it had to pay. And so the smuggling was just trying to get rid of the $2 that you had to pay so that you could still sell for $6.
Get
Yeah.
the whole profit.
It wasn't outlawed until 1886.
Okay. Someone says over here in Instagram, you did an incredible job portraying the devolution of a woman in an abusive relationship. It was heartbreaking how she, for a while, accepted her life. It felt very genuine and realistic.
I'm really glad to hear that because that was the hardest thing to write.
Mm-hmm.
That was the hardest thing to write. I was thinking about men and how women get themselves into that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, they're marrying a man that they don't know is violent. And then by the time they're in the middle of the relationship, they're so entangled, they can't get out. And especially in the 19th century. And Haley herself was she had other obligations. Her father she had to take care of, and her brother she had to take care of. So I appreciate that it worked for you because that was a hard one. That was a hard one to write.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it was a little hard to read, but at the same time, like the questioner says, it felt so genuine, and like it's a fine line to walk where you don't want your reader to give up on your character, but you also want them to, you got to be realistic about how difficult it would have been.
Yeah, and I think that's our 21st century,
Yes.
But there are still women today who are in those situations, and how do you get out? It's more than just walk out the door. It's psychological, it's financial, it's social, it's all these problems.
Yes.
That's what I like to say about historical fiction is that you can illuminate present day problems by showing that those problems still existed in the past in much the same way.
Yeah, so someone wants to say that they are intimidated by the research piece of historical romance, but how you described it makes it seem less daunting.
I'm glad because you just follow your nose, basically. You follow your nose, you find a book, you read the book, you follow that book, gives you another idea. You're just following your nose down. And often you stumble on something you didn't even know you were looking for. It's all a surprise. It's all fun. You're not getting a grade. It's fantastic fun. I think you would agree, right, Dylan? It's
Oh
fun.
my gosh. Not only do I love to read it, I mean, I feel like I learned something with I learned so much because, like you said, Robin, a lot of stuff we write doesn't end up in the book. But I learn so much with every book I write. And it's a delight to recreate. You know what I mean? Like, we don't know exactly what people said and did. And so it's sort of a delight to just imagine what might have happened.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than that. Somebody says, Robin, you have a real skill for writing characters that elicit strong emotions in the reader. I will agree with that. Somebody asked me, how do you do that? I don't know. How do you do that, Robin?
My mother used to say that I had a wild imagination. That's probably part of it. I think part of it's innate. But I think part of it, I don't know, for you, Dolen, right? Your characters become real. Like they're real. They're in the room with you, right?
Well, before we got on, y'all, and y'all know the good stuff always happens when we're not on camera. We were talking about what were we talking about? Yearning, longing. What were we talking about?
Yeah, that trying to finish a novel and knowing that you're done. And you said the hair on your back of your neck stands up, or you get a tingling feeling.
Right.
Yeah, and I was saying that I know that I'm done when I've pretty much solved the problem of what the character's soul wants.
Ah, that's it. Those are your words. What the character's soul wants.
Yeah. And that's the emotional arc, right?
Yes, and what their soul wants is not necessarily what they're overtly acknowledging in the book that they want, right? Like what Haley's soul like Haley, excuse me, she's in love with Samuel, but what her soul wants could be something like her soul could want something different and deeper. And I think I don't know, let me see, what would I guess? What Haley's soul wants is the freedom to love and be loved and, a life beyond, her family. I don't know.
She wants autonomy and the freedom to find a wild and heavenly place.
Heavenly place.
She doesn't want to be like her mother initially, and then suddenly that blossoms into other things she wants. And then the desire might change, but at least it's all sort of on that full link. At least that's how I think about it. But deep inside.
Did you title the book?
My agent.
Oh.
She pulled it out of the, because a wild and heavenly place is a phrase in the book. And she said that's what it should be called. She has titled most of my books. I don't know. How does that work for you?
Oh, yeah. I'm terrible at titling.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
They usually laugh at me when I suggest a title. They say, that's nice. Try harder.
I don't know if a lot of people know this, but when we sign these contracts, y'all, the title, it has a specific clause in the, I guess they already know. And, a lot of, newly published or debut or aspiring novelists think that they have the right to title their book. But there is a clause in the contract that basically says we have the right of approval, something like that, right, Robin? But ultimately, the publisher decides on the title. So it's one of those things where when the conversations begin, everybody has to be happy.
Everybody has to be happy. And it's, somebody once explained it to me that it's also a marketing tool.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to capture the essence of the novel and the title. And sometimes I think we're too close. We don't quite see it. Somebody else might see it more clearly. But just like a cover is a marketing thing. They want people to pick it up. That's what happens generally.
Yeah. Well, I love your title. I think it's beautiful. It's very poetic. And it's so perfect for Seattle because, one of the most beautiful places on earth. I read that you said that that place is really important for you in all of your fiction, that you've lived in the same house for 31 years. That, like, tell me, what's the importance of place for you as a writer?
I think it's about me personally, and that is that I'm not somebody who can just pick up and leave a house or a place or wherever I am. I'm always searching for sort of the whole package. Is the landscape pleasing? Does the air smell right? And what's been interesting to me is that it feels a little bit out of my control, because when I went to Scotland and I went up into the Highlands on the train, and the whole thing, I'm Scottish, and and I'd never been there before, and it was like my DNA was just vibrating. And looking back on my life, I have tried to find the places I have loved have been sort of versions of that all
Mm.
my life. And
Oh, that's
it
interesting.
speaks to my soul in a way that I can't really quite even address.
Hmm.
I'm not disconnected from where I live. I have to love where I love where I live. I have to see all around me the kind of beauty that I need so that I'm happier.
Do you think you could live in New York City like your mother did?
That's a big question, because New York City, everybody loves New York, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have been there probably only for lengths of time that last 3 days.
Yeah.
How about you? Can you live there?
I don't think so. I'm a Southerner. I love New York and I love going up there, but I need quiet. I like to wake up and hear nothing but birds.
Birds, I agree. I
Okay,
know.
let's see. Let me put my glasses on and see if we have any remaining questions. You've got a super fan here, Robin. One of my all-time favorite authors. This person hasn't had a chance to read the book yet, so hopefully we haven't given too many spoilers. Super fan. I love you guys.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else have questions? Put them in the chat. We talked a little bit about Samuel earlier. You said he was a composite of a lot of men in your life. But did you have anything else to say about him as a character?
Um, I've written male characters before, and I've written from the male point of view. Um, and he was pretty easy to write. Samuel was, because he never ever changed what he wanted. From the second he saw Haley, he wanted Haley. And so when he came to certain decision points about what he had to do, um, he was always referencing Haley and his desire for her. And so that made him easy to write, because I knew what he wanted. I knew who he wanted, I knew what he wanted, and I knew that he would do anything for her for the rest of her life, which
Ooh,
made him a pretty easy character to write.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So, Robin, what was something that surprised you writing this book? Like, was there anything that, like, you researched, or any part of the process that, I mean, this is your fourth book, and I know I'm still kind of learning, like, I mean, we learn every time. Every time I start a new book, I have no idea what I'm doing. But was there anything about your research or the writing of this book that surprised you?
Um, I think probably it had to do with race, because I knew that the Chinese in Seattle were poorly treated, but what I didn't know was how integral and how important they were to the city of Seattle in the early part. So, right about the time that the novel begins, there were only 3,000 people in Seattle, and that sort of depended on how you counted it, whether you were out far or you staying in close. And so there were 3,000, and about 790 of them were Chinese.
Wow.
And I know, right?
Third. That's
Pardon?
almost a third.
Yeah, it's almost a third. And they were doing all the work of building Seattle. They graded the roads. They built the railroad up into the coal mine where I live. They, not that I live in the coal mine, but they um, brought it up this mountain. They did a lot of mining especially in Renton, which is south of Seattle. They did a lot of the dirty work that was around. And then in 1886, when more white people came, they were, there was a riot and they were kicked out of Seattle. And
Mm.
that was, I mean, I knew that that had happened. I had read Annie Dillard's Living. If nobody has read Annie Dillard's Living, it's extraordinary. Another wonderful book about sort of Pacific Northwest. Um, but I was shocked at how, I shouldn't be, but how ungrateful the whole city was to the Chinese for what they had done. They were just dismissed, and much of their wealth was taken away, and they were sent back to China. So it's horrifying.
And that's to me, I mean, that this is one of the reasons why it's important to like know the history, because to me, that is the kind of thing that people need to know, in terms of empowering current Chinese American residents in the city, right? That you are a part of the very fabric of the city. And so, there should be more representation politically, there should be more representation in the big tech industries, but when people don't know the history, there's no sense of repair. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That's why we write historical fiction. And I think it's really important to bring up the ugly stuff as well.
Yeah.
You could write a book like this without ever dealing with it.
Not ever mentioning. Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't be true.
It wouldn't be true. 790.
Yeah, wouldn't be true.
So I guess the last question is, what is next? And I know this, when we're on tour with the new book, still in hardcover, and y'all ask this question, y'all, it makes us just want to scream, because we're like, I haven't even, had my paperback's not even out yet. And I know you maybe aren't even writing on anything yet, but maybe you are. So,
okay.
Somebody just asked if we saw the eclipse today, but we'll end with the eclipse question. But writing.
Writing, I have an idea for a novel. The thing is, if I'm going to write a book about an idea, I have to find a new way that's never been written about. And in this particular case, it is a well-documented thing. I've found a sort of a funny way in. But the other thing is, does anybody care? You always wonder, does anybody care about you? I'm still trying to figure that part out, but I have an idea.
I have a good girlfriend who, when I have an idea, I call her and see if she cares. And if she cares, I know other people care. But it is very hard to do that with my own natural curiosity. I do have to have sounding boards. And I will, call her and say, hey, I'm doing this research. And if she says that's fascinating, I know it's a good one. But if she's like distracted and not very interested, then I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't good.
Well, that's very good advice. I usually keep stuff too close to me, because once you start saying what you're writing about, everybody has ideas, it'd be so cool if I'm thinking, yeah, but that's not what the book's about. But maybe.
And you can get scooped. Like, there's nothing worse than working on something and then seeing somebody else write a book about it. It's like,
I know. It's hard. There's a lot of books out there.
There are a lot of books.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody wants to know, will there be a sequel to this book?
Well, like I said, there's 3 novels in here. So there were 3 novels. I have to think about that. I swore I would never write a sequel to My Name is Mary Sutter. I went everywhere and people kept saying, "What? I want to hear from Mary Sutter." And I thought I wouldn't do it. But in my 3rd novel, I needed a female doctor in Albany, New York. And suddenly it became very clear to me that the only one who would be Mary Sutter. And I thought she would have a cameo. And then I realized you can't have Mary Sutter walk on stage and not give her more than a little to do. So never say never. I don't know.
You think you'll write another romance?
I look back and there's a love story in each of my novels. Mm-hmm. This time it's really at the forefront.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there'll always be a love story in it, but it won't be the forefronted one.
Okay, and so finally, they want to know about the eclipse. Y'all weren't in the direct path in Seattle, right?
I was in Pilates class, and I was next to the window, and the light didn't change because today it's rainy and cloudy.
Yeah.
Did you see anything?
I didn't see anything. It didn't really, didn't really change here, but
Mm,
I watched it on TV so I could see what it looked like, y'all. I mean, I wanted to see what the total eclipse looked like.
yeah.
And as the news channels went to each city, I watched it. My kids had glasses and they went out and, but it
Did they
was
see anything?
a little underwhelming,
Yeah,
little
yeah.
bit. But did y'all see it? Was anybody in the path of the total eclipse? Anybody? Nope. Okay. Well, Robin, thank you so much. I mean, I just want to, where's my book? I just want to make one last plug here. If anybody is on the call or watching this recording later and you haven't read A Wild and Heavenly Place, I really want to urge y'all to read it. It's such a beautiful book. I've said this before, like I love this cover. But it's just a good read. I mean, you're going to learn a lot about the history of Seattle, but you're also going to get a really good story. I couldn't put the book down. When you're in the hands of a seasoned writer like Robin, she doesn't disappoint. You know what I mean? Everything is smooth and well researched and just brilliantly plotted, and characters, like somebody said, that you're going to feel really emotional about one way or the other. I just want to highly recommend this book. Put it on your list, give it to someone as a gift, and support historical fiction.
Mhm.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Robin.
Thank you, Dolen. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for joining and listening.
Thank you. Bye.